Welcome back, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to Madlad Instruments. It's a bit of a chilly day here in McKinney, Texas. As you can see, I have my thermal on. This is the, not throwaway thermal, but this is the one that I throw on when it's cold outside and I don't want to get sawdust all over my clothes. And can't see it, but really cozy in some pajama pants. Making the best of today. Today's MLK Day, so we've got the day off. Well, we don't have the day off here, but it's kind of a holiday for a lot of people, and so we're just vibing, catching up on some work, getting the week off to a good start. We've got a lot of cool projects in the works, and one of them is that we actually have to grain stain this body, and we are going to be grain staining it red, which is something that I have never done before. And so I thought it would be a perfect time to address and talk a little bit about how I do my grain stain bodies and the wonderful world of grain filling and why you should do grain filling, and kind of a tutorial. A lot of people have been asking me how I do my process, and I'm pretty unabashed about my secret sauce here in the shop. I like showing off a lot of what I do because this is all in the spirit of helping you to build better instruments, and if I get to be a little bit of a part of that, then that's super duper rad. Not claiming to be the be all end all expert. There are plenty of ways to grain fill a piece of wood. This is just my particular sauce. It could change in a year or 2 years, so make sure that you're subscribed in case I do an update video, but this will cover the basics and get you guys kind of into a headspace of how to do grain filling. So let's talk a little bit about some fundamentals. So when you have a piece of wood like ash is very porous. What that means is it's basically like a sponge. You know how sponges have a bunch of different holes and crevices in them and stuff like that. So the wood, by virtue of how it grows and how the fibers lay down according to Mother Nature, there's a lot of gaps in between it. Typically, the tighter the grain, the heavier the wood, or the more dense the wood, the more open the grain, or the more wider the grain, the lighter the wood. That isn't a hard and true fact necessarily. Wood hardness and stuff comes down to a lot of different factors, but what I've noticed is that typically softer woods will have a little bit of a wider grain, and then tighter woods like mahogany will have a really tight grain. But all the same, there's always going to be some little gaps in there, and when you go to finish a guitar, so when you put down color and polyurethane or nitro or stuff like that, those little pockets are going to create little divots, which if that's something that you're going for, that's really rad. There are some finishes that have kind of a natural finish to it, and some builders have even taken it even further and done like sandblasting. I'm going to be building something similar to that for another client, so be on the lookout for that in a future video. But in order to get everything flat and to give your finish and your top coat something really nice and level to stand on or to sit on, and thus increase the luster and make your life a whole lot easier when it comes to level sanding and putting down the finish correctly, you'll want to do grain filling. So grain filling is just the process of putting something into those little divots so that the finish has something smooth to sit on betwixt the fibers and the little holes that the fibers will leave as they lay down. Hopefully that makes sense, but long story short, you're just putting something down in the holes in the grain and you're filling them, hence grain filler. And you can have a ton of fun with this. So there are a number of different grain fillers out on the market. There are chemical-based ones, there are epoxy-based ones, there are water-based ones. And the particular one that I use, which we'll talk about here in just a second, is a water-based one. So we're going to mostly be talking about water-based grain filler. Why do I like water-based grain filler? Well, one, it's a lot easier to work with. Two, since it's water-based, it's a lot less chemically, I guess you can say. My thought being, water-based means that you don't have like a solvent or some sort of petrochemical that is the base. Not saying that that's a bad thing, but typically you can dilute water-based fillers and stuff with water, which makes them easier to work with. They go on smoother. They're a lot easier to sand because once they dry, the water evaporates away and you're just left with kind of the leftover. Whereas if you're using something like epoxy, it's going to solidify and cure, and so you're working against like chemicals and solidified crystallized plastic or resin basically. And so yeah, there's a lot of benefits that I prefer for water-based and why I use water-based, but not the least of which being that it is very beginner friendly. So, second question that you may be asking is like, okay, Drew, water-based filler is great, but what particular one do you use? And this is it. Again, the sauce right here. Not trying to be cloak and dagger about any of this. AuqaCoat. So I was actually put onto this from Highline Guitars, Chris over at Highline Guitars, who is something of an oracle. I don't think this shop would exist without some of the wisdom from Highline Guitars, but this is the same stuff that he uses. This is AuqaCoat Clear Wood Grain Filler. So it's clear. I think they may sell some colored ones as well, but I like getting the clear stuff because you can get a big old tub of it, and then you can use colorants or water-based gels to kind of color it and do all sorts of stuff. I, as you can see, have a number of different tubs here. So I have a mixing tub here. This is the black filler. So it's got black filler all over it because I've been using it so much. And I just have some extra pots because I really don't throw much away. So these are just some empty ones that I can use to mix up different colors. We will be using one of these in just a second. So I'm going to keep this right here. But again, super duper easy, AuqaCoat. Now, what I like to do with my particular AuqaCoat, if you can see it, I'll probably bring in the camera just a little bit here. So hopefully y'all can see it, but there's a little bit of a mix here. So you've got the clear AuqaCoat, which is right here, but also whenever, you'll see when we sand back everything, we'll talk about sanding here in a second, but whenever you sand back and you put more clear coat on top of freshly sanded wood, it'll actually pick up some of the dust and residue from that, and it creates this kind of putty. This is basically like a pseudo wood filler. So this is grain filler. This is meant to fill the spaces in between. But if you have like a big gap or something where you just need to put down a lot of like mass so that you can sand over it, that's what I use this stuff for. This has come in handy in a pinch whenever I have like really big gaps, or like, let's say there's a panel gap between the glue up, or like you machine it down and you realize that there's a pocket in there near the glue up. You can put this down and it'll sand just as fine. So keep the dusty stuff. But as you can see in the middle here, we've also got all of our clear stuff as well. This is the stuff that we're actually going to be mixing. So that is that lined up. So again, AuqaCoat, one of these usually gets me through about 5 to 10 different guitars. So if you were a DIY or a home builder, this is going to be all that you need for probably a couple months to a year. And if you're working in a professional shop like me, then you have tubs and tubs of the stuff that you go through. So secondly, when it comes to coloring the stuff, what do you use? Well, again, you can use just about any water-based grain filler, or sorry, not grain filler, water-based gel stain, but I like unicorn spit. This is stuff that you can get at your local hobby shop, and it's about $10 per bottle. It is water-based, it's a gel stain, so you can mix it in. We're gonna mix this in just a little bit. I do have a bottle of red in here somewhere that I'll need to find, but as you can see, this is the black one. I've used this to mix up tons and tons of black grain filler. Again, a bottle of unicorn spit. Here it is. It was all sorts of dusty here. I need to clean this area out. But yeah, here's the red stuff that we're going to be using. But you can use this. Again, this is about, you probably get 2 tubs of AuqaCoat out of 1 thing of unicorn spit. So I usually use about half a bottle to mix up. And again, it's all by color, so we'll figure it out based on the actual color. So hopefully that gives you an overview of the actual supplies that you're going to need. Again, just AuqaCoat or your water-based filler. Then if you're going to be tinting it, you can use unicorn spit or really just any sort of gel stain. Make sure you're using water to water. Don't use like an oil-based color because sometimes they don't mix. Water and oil don't mix. That's a tale as old as time. But with that in mind, water-based filler, water-based gel stain, and it'll mix just fine. And speaking of that, let's go ahead and mix this up. So, like I said, we have a regular old clear, and clear will go down just fine. But if you're wanting to mix the stuff up, it is super duper simple to do. All you gotta do, grab your container. It's just as simple as scooping some of this out, putting it into a mixing tub, and then we're gonna mix in the color and we'll go from there. Alrighty, so I got about that much. That's maybe like 1/5 of the tub. I think this should be more than enough for us to get a body or 2 out of it. And just have a wood paint stirrer here that I got from Lowe's. You can kind of use it to smush it down. This is kind of the consistency of mashed potatoes. So if you're like mixing it up and stuff like that and it starts to clump, that's by design. And so no worries there. Also, it's probably good practice to not be mixing color over the top of a blank body. So we're gonna move that over. I moved that over for a little bit. So just a couple drops, start super duper simple. We're gonna see if I can get a good angle there. Stuff starts coming out. That stuff's really thick. It's been sitting for a little bit. And we get to mixing. And just like anything else with color theory, this is to taste. So mix it in, get a feel for the color. If it's a little bit too light or a little bit too dark, I would always start with a fewer drops and slowly build up, because it's a lot harder to remove color than it is to add color. So start with just a few and then go from there. This is kind of like a pink here. I might add a little bit more here in just a second, but so far so good. Really, really easy. It took not all of 15 seconds to mix this up. So it's taking it well. Again, like mashed potatoes, just kind of work it around. If it's clumping, that's okay too. We'll just scrape it off on the edge and it'll fall back in there, no problem. So that's kind of the color that we got there. I'm wondering if we can get maybe just a little bit more red out of it. So let's see if we can. There we go. Now it's really coming out. But we want a really vibrant, intense kind of red color to this because it's going to have to pop through orange and another red kind of feathered out on the edge. So working that up and mixing it up. And now it's looking a lot more like fire red, which I like. That's what we're going for. How's your day going? This is kind of ASMR and we're mixing here, so we might as well check in. How are things going? How's your new year going? It's just the start of January. Lots of opportunity, lots of great things that we can do with the year. So the other thing that you can think about, this is starting to turn into a sanding soliloquy, but not sanding, we're grain filling. This is a grain filling soliloquy. I do, on some of my other videos, I call them sanding soliloquies, where I'll just be sanding and I'll talk about whatever. But here we're mixing up grain filler. But there's never a bad time to make a resolution. There's never a bad time. I know New Year's is convenient because it's the start of a new year, and a lot of people are like, all right, I'm in the resolution mindset. But having a mindset towards changing things or resolving things, that can happen anytime. So it's never a bad day to, start a new habit or kick an old habit, something like that, to get your days outlined. I know for me personally, I wanted to outline a little bit more and organize my days a little bit better in the new year because I'm going to be starting law school in the fall. I'm going to need to be on my A game as far as organization goes and time management goes. So I've been blocking out stuff a lot more, making sure that I give time for Madlad, give time for Mechanics, which is the other software company. We're building cool software for the esports and streaming industry. So making sure that everybody gets its time and also some time for some more personal stuff like studying some new languages and all sorts of stuff. So it's never a bad time. If you have a resolution at the new year, that's great. I hope it's going well. I hope you're sticking to it. But never be afraid if it's just the middle of March and you want to pick up a new hobby or start something. There's never a bad time. Always remember that you can start a new resolution whenever you like. Look at that. Nice deep red color, almost like a beet red. So now we actually get into the fun stuff. This was boring stuff up to this point where we were just mixing color and doing that stuff. But now let's actually talk about how we go about grain staining. And it's going to be a lot of fun because it's basically like finger painting. So let's check it out. Alrighty, so here is our grain staining strategy. So as you can tell, this body is rough. It is very much rough. It just came off the CNC. And sanding and grain filling is kind of a two-step process. So if you coordinate your sanding and your grain filling, it'll be a lot easier. You typically do grain filling as you're going through progressive sanding, which, as you know, is one of my favorite things. So whenever I'm grain filling a body, normally I would progressively sand 100 grit, 220, 320, and then off to the races. But for this, since we're going to be doing grain filling, typically you need about 2 coats to get the grain fill to actually sit in and get a good feel. Sometimes you need even more depending on the ash and stuff that you're using. But the way that I do it, still doing progressive sanding, but what I will do is my first pass, I'll do 120 just to, rough out some of the shaping stuff and everything like that. There's some areas here around the bout that I'll probably touch up after the first cut of grain fill. We'll talk about that in a little bit once we get there. But yeah, the 100 grit is going to allow the pores to open up as well. And so it's going to be able for us to knock down and shape any of these areas that we need to, get rid of some of these scraggly little bits that are left over from CNC. So we're going to do 100. I keep thinking 220. We're going to do our 100 pass first. We're going to put down our first coat of grain filler, give it 2 hours. We're going to sand that back at 220. So there's that 220 layer. We're going to put our second coat of grain fill down, and then we're finally going to finish out with 220. So again, we're doing the 100, the 220, and the 320, same sequence as if it was a raw body, but we're just adding coats of grain fill in between. And it should all work out. So I'm going to go ahead and sand this up to 100, and we'll cue the time lapse, and we'll actually get a real sanding soliloquy, so maybe we'll continue our conversation. But I will meet you guys back after we have this sanded up to 120 and we are ready to put down our first coat of grain filler. So don't go nowhere. Alrighty, first pass has been done, and now comes the fun part. This is where the fun begins, to quote Anakin Skywalker. So, got me some nitrile gloves. We've got our filler. The last thing you'll probably need, and you don't need this thing in particular, but something of its ilk, that is to say something that is like it, is a plastic scraper. You can get these, again, at Bezos Land, set of 10 or 15 is like $10. but we're going to need that to scrape off the excess here in a little bit. So grain filler, AuqaCoat instructs you to put it on with the grain. So we're going to be going left to right and then scrape it against the grain. So what's going to happen is we're basically going to put the grain filler down. It's going to settle in there. And then when we come back and scrape it perpendicularly, it's just going to take all that excess off of it without taking away the stuff that's already in the pores. That's why you do it in a different direction. So again, this is where you get to go back to kindergarten and have a little bit of fun. We're just going to finger paint this. So get you a big old glob. You don't have to be too discriminate. And before you do anything crazy or like do any sort of crazy color combos, you can always test this on a scrap. By the way, if you ever order a body from Madlad, I'm happy to send you scraps because I've got scraps for days. So you'll help me clean up my shop space just a little bit. But if you're ordering from another manufacturer, you might ask them to see if they can send you some scraps because they're probably like me and they need to clean up their shop space. So I pretty much know how this is going to go down. So I'm pretty stoked. But if you're curious or want to practice, you can always do this on a piece of scrap as well. So without further ado, obligatory testing on a piece of scrap message out of the way. Let's get going. So just gonna rub it in here, work it in. And for this first coat, it's gonna penetrate some of the grains, but not all of them. So don't be too taken aback if it doesn't seem like it's penetrating. Just kind of let the filler do its work. And I'll get it to maybe about one section here. Another thing about this is it'll actually show you where like some of the rough areas are from your sanding. I just noticed along the curve here, or sorry, the arm relief, that there's maybe a little bit of spotting there. So we'll come back and focus on that when we do our next round of sanding. But I'll usually just cover, get everything even, bring it all out, and then we have our top pretty much taken care of. Now, inevitably, you can probably see, the astute among you notice that there's going to be a little bit of filler that collects around the edges on these things, on the edges of like the input jack here and the control cavity and stuff like that. That's going to happen. It's an inevitability. So you just go through there, grab a little bit of it. Again, not a super duper strict policy or strict procedure here. We are just finger painting, reliving kindergarten and all the joyous times that we had back then, and just pick that up. If for whatever reason you don't pick it up, it's not the end of the world. Don't worry, this stuff will solidify and it'll be kind of like a gel, or almost like, what can I equate it to? But my point is, you can take it back with a razor blade, so you can get just like a razor blade or a box cutter and just go over the edge of it when it's dry and it'll take it right off. So don't worry if you don't pick up all of it, you can always scrape it later. So top has been coated. It's looking really cool. Kind of reminds me of like a jelly Pop-Tart. So, and then from here, this is where the real fun starts to happen. You start to see all of it pick up. Look at that. It's already staining all those greens. And again, remember, this is filled up with like sawdust and stuff like that. So I'm just gonna scrape it, put it on the edge here. You can use that for filler later. This reminds me a lot of like the mahogany filler or the red filler that they'll use on like the Les Pauls and stuff like that. It'll give it this really kind of cool lava effect to it. So getting big raspberry vibes from this. Maybe I'll come up with a raspberry finish. And again, going perpendicular, but it doesn't have to be a perfect perpendicular. On some of these areas around the bouts, that's the technical term that we use for the horns of the guitar, you can kind of work it and just kind of scrape it and get it out that way. Just scrape that, you keep going. Now you're gonna notice that it's cloudy. This is kind of how it has like a pinkish hue to it. Don't worry about that. That again, that's inevitably going to happen. Remember, you're spreading color across the entire top of this, but what's happening is the grain filler is only going to permeate into the grain lines here, because remember, those are deeper. And all these areas that look like they're dyed on the top, once we sand it, those are going to go back to kind of the natural white color. So it's going to look really, really cool. I'm excited to show you guys that here in a little bit. So that is the top done. And then the string holes will usually pool up a little bit here. I have a super long drill bit here. You can usually just grab it, put those through. Again, when you go to do cleanup or when you're finishing up, you'll want to check this as well, just to make sure you don't have any pooling in the string holes. But if you do, just knock it out with a drill. Super duper straightforward. Like I said, this is one of the easiest products to work with. It is super duper easy to take down and do that. Also around the edges here, it's going to be a little bit higher, but we'll work that out in sanding. That's going to be kind of our theme is we'll work it out in sanding or we'll work it out in post. So there's that top stained, looking gorgeous. And like I said, we have a really, really dense piece of wood here. Lots of grain lines. So it's just picking up all this extra character and looking super duper cool. Let's do the back real quick. I'm curious to see how this works out because there's this kind of darker color in here. Let's see what happens. Like Bob Ross out here, we're just narrating. It's gonna be a lot of soliloquying, a lot of chill talk in this video because there's not a whole lot going on. This is super duper simple. A lot of people think that grain filling is, or a lot of aspects of guitar building are super duper technical, and there are some aspects that are a little bit more picky when you're going to assemble and intonate an instrument. That's a little bit more complicated, but a lot of the fab stuff, when you're fabricating, like doing grain fills and stuff like that, that's easy. Gets you back to your primitive or your kind of kid-like wonder and kid-like joy because we're playing with Play-Doh basically, or grain filler. We're rubbing it in and finger painting it all over the top of this guitar. And man, you could probably, like, once you sand this back, you could easily just like throw some top coat on it and be good to go. Man, this looks so cool. It's almost like a translucent red. The black, when you do black grain filler too, it's got this really cool black kind of shady color that goes over the top of it. So we picked a very, very high contrast color to do today. And so you're seeing the brunt of it. All right, so this is interesting. This is an area near the string ferrules that I had to sand down. So you notice there was a little bit of a cloud. That just shows you that there's a bit of a divot in the body, which is by design because I sanded down there. And we're just pulling this away. The back is usually a little bit easier, at least on Strats, because they don't have as much contouring on the back. So just going over the top, scraping it all. Look at how it's just picking up all that color. And then for the belly carve, I usually just like to work it over the top like that. Another big scrape. You can really kind of rub it in there. Get out your frustrations. Really good scrape. And we'll just bring it over. And I just like to go around the edges, kind of rub it in there, make sure that's making contact. A fun little fact about guitar finishing, finish will always be thinner along the edges. It's often an area when you spray a finish straight onto a guitar, you're spraying over the top. But since the edges are contoured, as it's getting sprayed, all that finish is going around and it doesn't quite go all the way around because it's, think of it like straight on. Think of it kind of like a sheet of paper, like you're putting a sheet of paper down, but it's going to kind of curl around the edge. And when it curls, there's going to be more surface area there that the finish has to cover, so it's not going to cover it as evenly as the top. Hope that makes sense, but it's the same with grain filler as well. You just kind of want to check the edges and make sure that it's rubbed in. And when you're working over it, just be a little bit more gentle around the edges, just to make sure you don't take down the finish or the grain filler there. And we'll go around the edge. Man, this looks rad. I'm getting so many ideas now. I have so many ideas in the cooker. This year, we're going to be putting out a lot of videos with a lot of really cool custom builds for both my personal collection and probably some stuff that we pick up from Madlad clients just like you down the road. So definitely be on the lookout. But imagine that, just having like, you know, a grain stain with like kind of feathered around here. It's a little rough because obviously, you know, grain filler is everywhere, but I could easily see like a red grain filler with like a translucent red over the top and then just a little bit of feathering, dark red on the edge. I think that would be sick. Anyway, so we'll go around the edges here, and for the edge, you just kind of hanging around, scrape it up, keep it tight, and when you need to, just kind of give it a little bit of a shimmy, a little bit of a scrape. Again, looking at all your frustrations, you're just scratching into it, like scratching into your problems. And we'll go around here on the edge. You guys are welcome to watch this on 2x speed too. I realize it may not be the most riveting of content, but we're scraping. This is what it is. This is how grain filling works. You're getting the real deal right here. We were talking about New Year's resolutions earlier and how it's never a bad time to resolve or to pick up something new or a new habit or something like that. I think the other thing that a lot of people maybe don't talk about is just how taking stock is itself kind of a resolution. So you make a resolution because you take stock of something. You're like, man, I want to work out more, or I want to lose some weight, or I need to save some more money. So that process requires introspection, which is just a fancy word to say that you look inside yourself and figure some stuff out. But yeah, I think the process of introspection can also in itself be a resolution, because a lot of people are afraid to kind of look within and figure out what they'd like to change. But I think for a lot of those people that are maybe a little bit afraid, they just have never been given the permission to realize that we're all works in progress. Nobody is perfect, and nobody's ever going to leave here perfect. The only one who left perfect was Jesus, and he came here perfect too. So I aspire to be like that guy one day and make the world a better place. But in doing so, I'm also realistic with myself and realize that I'm not going to be perfect. And so it's all part of the process, as they say. But in case nobody's giving you permission, you always have permission to look within yourself and take some stock and maybe have some vulnerable conversations and say, I'd like to tweak this just a little bit, or I think it's a good time to kick that habit or maybe start something new. Transformation can only begin when we look for the areas where we can better serve ourselves. And when we can better serve ourselves and we grow, we can then better serve our communities and better serve our people. So if you're wondering why transformation or radical change isn't happening in your life, maybe it's just that you need to... I'm not saying this is like pejoratively or like I'm looking down on you or anything, but sometimes you just need a little permission to remind yourself that it's okay to not be perfect and it's okay to want to change things. And once you have that permission, you can start looking in and finding all sorts of amazing things that you can do better. And by doing better, you can make the world a better place. Hope that makes sense. A little bit of a line of consciousness. So it's like we just came out of surgery. We got blood on the gloves. So got that all worked out. Look, she's looking pretty. And one of the things that I really, really like that kind of gives it a home feel is how when you're working over it, there's going to be a little bit of grain fill that splashes into that neck pocket. I think the neck pocket is really going to tell you a lot about how that guitar was made. So I like it when there's just a little bit of splatter and it has that kind of worked in look. It's not super duper perfect or super duper clean. So this is very much a product of this guitar getting worked over and over. So we're going to give this 2 hours to cure. We're going to come back and hit it with 220. And then I'm really, really stoked to show you guys how it's going to contrast, because you're going to have like a lot of brilliant white next to red, and I think it's really going to pop. So I'll catch you guys in a little bit once we are ready to sand everything up. So don't go nowhere. Man, when you're like one of the greatest content creators in the world and you are so good at what you do that you realize if you hit that time-lapse button, then the world's head's going to explode because of how collectively awesome that time-lapse is going to be. I'm just kidding, but forgot to hit the time-lapse button. But let's take a look at what we got here. So worked everything down, and as you can see, lots of pops of red. And there's going to be some areas where you take out the grain filler or like you sand a little bit past the grain line. And so here along the arm contour, you can see there's a little bit of an area where we need to refill, but that's why we do 2 coats. But so far so good. Also had to do a little bit of shaping up around these bouts just to take out some little bits of there. On the back, we can still see kind of the streaks coming through, or the I don't know if you call them mineral streaks, but the different coloration in the wood we get to still get a little bit of a look at that. So I'm sure that's going to look cool once it has finish on it. But in those areas that are a little bit brighter, we still have grain fill. Also around the edges, you may have noticed that I haven't sanded those down too hard because, again, what we were talking about earlier, sometimes the filler is a little bit thinner over there, so you leave it on. And it could be a little bit tricky going around the edges. I usually just do it manually. I'll come in here and just sand it down. But we'll hit it with the automatic or the orbital sander once we hit 320, because that's not as abrasive a grit, and so it won't take nearly as much material, and we can go slow and kind of take that down. Plus, with the burst that we're going to be doing on this one, these edges are going to be feathered in a little bit of a darker color anyways, so I think it's going to blot it out, or, the color is going to cover any of those areas, but I digress. if we're doing a 100% super clean job, then yeah, you'd want to take these down and make sure that they're sanded equally. But sometimes, depending on the finish that you're doing, you can cheat a little bit. So let's go ahead and slather down our second coat. We'll let that cure up, and then we'll come back for final sanding. Alrighty, and that is a wrap on this guy. So really great example of how you can do grain staining, and you can literally see the effects because they're glowing red. So this body will go on to get sprayed with Mythic Red Burst, which is a new finish that we are cooking up with a client named Craig, who's really, really cool. I'm gonna have a full video on that on the channel and linked up here if it's already out, so be sure to check that out. Make sure you're subscribed as well so you can see it when it comes out. And yeah, there's all sorts of fun stuff that you can do with grain staining. You can do black, you can do all sorts of different colors. You can even split colors and do like one half a certain color and then the other half another color. So I have no doubt that many of you guys are going to cook up some really incredible grain stain effects. And it all is in the name of prepping and allowing you to do a really cool finish on the other side. So once everything is grain filled, not only does it look cool, but it adds to the finish, whatever finish you put down. Or maybe you just put clear down over it and you have kind of a candy cane guitar. That's what I'm looking at. This reminds me of like candy canes or strawberry shortcake or something like that. So yeah, hope you learned something. If you guys have questions or want to comment, leave a comment down below. Make sure you like and subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and we'll end up in the normal way, and that is by me saying, always remember, friends, that you are wanted, you are loved, and you are appreciated. You have a special talent that nobody else has, and the world is waiting on you to bring it out. So Mr. A Little Courage, go out into the world and change it. That's what the world's waiting on. You. Till next time, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, be good to one another, and God bless.